Just outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, an old library and music hall still stands. But in its basement, something far darker waits. For over a century, whispers have spread through the town of the evil that lives there. The staff avoid certain rooms, and those who've come face to face with it are never the same. And some, like the men who died there long ago, never leave at all. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. Now prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. They say history never really leaves a place. It lingers, restless and waiting. In a century-old building once filled with tortured steelworkers, a man walks into the basement and steps into a darkness that refuses to let him go. Because sometimes, what's buried beneath the floors of an old landmark doesn't want to stay buried. For any listeners that visited this location or knows anything more about its past, please comment below. I would like to know more. Now sit back and enjoy this creepy encounter. Thank you for letting me share this. I've kept it to myself because it has messed with my head, my sleep, and my life. I don't want attention. I want it to stop. If you use this on your channel, don't use my full name. You can call me T. So, this happened the week before Thanksgiving last year near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the town of Homestead. A friend had extra tickets to a show at the old library building up on the hill near the river. I know you don't use exact names, but locals will know it. The place with the big stone front and the auditorium that feels like stepping back 100 years. It was cold that night, one of those early winter evenings where the air coming off the water gets into your bones. A mist hung low in the streetlights. I remember because the beams looked fuzzy and the sidewalks were slick. I'm a simple guy. I work maintenance for a property company, furnaces, boilers, busted locks. Not the kind of person who sees things. I calculate, I fix, I go home. I don't drink much. That night, I had half a beer at the intermission. I want to be clear, because people always ask about that. The show was in the auditorium upstairs. The band was older, soul-type music with a brass section and a lead singer who could really sing. There was a comfort to it. I like old places. I always have. Near the end of the second set, I needed the restroom. I asked an usher, and she pointed past a set of double doors. Down the stairs, then keep right. It sounded straightforward. I stepped out, closed the doors behind me, and the music muffled to a thump. The hallway was dim. A few framed photos on the walls. Sepia, men in work clothes standing in rows. I took the stairwell on the left. I noticed the air changed too. You know that old building smell? Paint, dust, and something like cold metal? Down there, it was that, mixed with damp. Not sewer. More like river water and old linen. At the bottom, the light was wrong. That's the best way I can write it. A long, buzzing fluorescent was going, but it gave out a color that made everything look flat, like the hallway wasn't a hallway, but a picture of one. It forked left and right. To the left were two heavy doors with push bars and no windows, marked, "Keep closed." To the right, a corridor with pale tile, a few storage doors, and a sign for the restrooms. The tile floor had a slope, barely noticeable, and I caught myself adjusting my steps to it. I passed a door with a glass porthole and saw darkness inside, like a room that should have had a light but didn't. I kept going. When I reached the restroom, the men's sign was newer than everything else. Plastic, blue and white, screwed into a brick wall with mismatched screws. I pushed the door and went in. Empty. 2 stalls, 1 urinal, a sink. The mirror was old, the kind where the silvering surrenders around the edges and makes a dark halo. No music down there. No sound at all, just the ballast hum from the light fixture. While I was washing my hands, the door behind me opened gently. I saw it in the mirror, a shadow where the crack had been. I turned and no one came in. The door just finished opening by itself and stayed that way. I remember feeling embarrassed, like I was the one being rude. I said, "Hey, sorry," and stopped because the sound of my voice was wrong in that room. It was too close to my ears. I looked down and noticed someone had tracked in prints from outside. The size wasn't right, though. The toes were long, too long, and the space between the first and second toe was wide, like it splayed. I leaned closer to the mirror. I noticed the light above the sink had a tremor. Everything went colder, not like air conditioning, but like standing in a freezer for too long. I backed to the door and reached for the handle. As my fingers touched metal, the stall latch clicked. It wasn't loud, just a single polite click, followed by the gentle sound of something moving. I couldn't see feet from where I stood, just the bottom line of the stall panel, and a shadow that didn't match the shape of a person. It stretched long and thin across the gap, then pulled back as if it noticed me looking. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't. I had the door handle in my hand, but my arm wouldn't pull. I know paralysis happens to people in fear. This wasn't that. This felt more like a hand laid on my chest saying, "Stay. Wait." The light dimmed one more notch. The ballast stopped humming, and for a moment there was nothing to hear. Then there was a breath, low, measured, like air moving through a space. The stall door swung open slow. The gap widened. I still couldn't see a face. I saw a forearm first, pale and hairless. Not smooth exactly. They looked like the hairs were there but pressed flat with water. The elbow bent wrong, too much range, like it would keep bending the other way if you let it. A hand slid along the metal divider. The fingers were long. The nails weren't nails. They were more like thickened ends, dull. The hand stopped above the waste bin, and drops fell from the fingertips. Each drop hitting too loud, each drop leaving a dark spot. There was a whisper then, very close, as if a mouth were level with my ear, though no one stood next to me. It wasn't a language I know. It moved through sounds in layers, like 2 or 3 voices trying to say the same word at the same time, but failing to align. My name was in it. It said my name as if it were a word in that other speech. I think I said, "Please don't. I don't beg for anything." But I said it. The light flickered off and on. In that one-breath blackout, something stood between me and the mirror. When the light came back, the mirror showed a tall shape behind me, blacker than the room, with a faint shine on the front like wet cloth. The outline wasn't crisp. It was soft at the edges, and the height felt taller than the door frame. I turned to see it, and there was nothing there. Only the open stall. I pulled the door at last. It opened as if nothing had been in the way, like the hand had lifted. Out in the hall, the light looked normal. The hum resumed, softer than before. I took the stairs up faster than I meant to. When I pushed into the auditorium hallway, the usher said, "Oh, there you are," and then glanced at my hands and said, "Are you okay? You're bleeding." I looked down and saw 2 thin lines across the backs of my fingers where I had held the door handle. The skin wasn't torn badly, more like pressed hard into an edge until it opened. I wiped them on my jeans and said I was fine. The usher took a half step back like I smelled bad. It was strange. I checked my phone. The show had ended. The crowd was gone. I don't know how to say this without sounding dramatic. I left my seat, walked downstairs, used the restroom, and came back to find 40-some minutes had evaporated. It should have been 5 minutes, 10 at most. My friend said he'd assumed I went home because of work in the morning. I didn't tell him anything. I made a joke. I said the line downstairs was long. He laughed, but not in a funny way. Outside, the mist had turned to a fine sleet. It hissed when it hit warm car hoods. I walked to my truck. My reflection in the window wasn't right. The light from the street distorted it somehow, so the eyes were two shadowed pits. I made myself look away. I drove home the way I always do, crossing the bridge, taking the back road behind the old brick stacks. I don't remember the middle part of the drive. I know that sounds like I'm lying. I'm not. I remember the first turn out of the lot and then my driveway. The clock on the dash said I had lost another 20 minutes. No traffic, no detours. That night, the knocks started. At 3:17 a.m., 3 quick knocks, not hard, not soft, on the wall by my bed. That wall is an exterior wall. I don't have a neighbor on that side. I sat up, heart going too fast, and listened to the house, which at that hour has a certain set of sounds you learn if you live alone. Settling wood, the click of the fridge, a car 2 blocks away. This was none of those. I turned on the lamp. The knocks stopped. I left the lamp on and stared at the wall like an idiot for an hour, waiting for something I wouldn't recognize anyway. It continued the next night, same time, but this time the knocks were on the window above the kitchen sink. A slow drag followed, like a wet finger running across glass. I went out on the porch with a flashlight and shined it around. Snow had dusted the yard. No footprints. But on the glass, there were marks. When I breathed on the pane, they showed up as clean lines in the fog, written from the inside. 4 vertical strokes, 1 diagonal, like a counting system. Not letters, not numbers. Maybe a tally or something. Remy, my old mutt with Shepherd in him, started refusing to go into the bathroom. He'd stop at the threshold and lean away. He'd never done that. Sometimes he would stand in the hall, look at the closed door, and whine in a low voice. 3 days later, I tried to pretend it was all in my head. People do that, because what else are we supposed to do? I went about my job. I kept appointments. I changed a circulator pump in a boiler one morning and caught myself counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause, in the same rhythm as the knocks. I stopped and looked around the basement I was in and felt shame for being scared. The basement smelled normal, oil and dust and warm metal. The day after Thanksgiving, I called the building. I asked to speak to whoever handles security. I said I'd lost something in the basement and wanted to look for it. That was easier to say than the truth. A man called me back. He gave me a time early in the afternoon when the place is quiet. The main entrance felt different in daylight. Less grand, more heavy. He was older than me, thin, watchful eyes. He didn't ask many questions. When I said, I was down by the restrooms the other night and, he cut in, a lot of people get turned around down there. The way he said it made me stop talking. He led me to the same side stairwell. Basement's weird, he said like he was warning me. Half of it is redone, half of it isn't. Pipes move sounds around. You'll hear things that aren't where you think. He flicked on the hallway light and held the stairwell door for me, but he didn't step through. He waited in the doorway. I noticed his hand shook just a little. He had a key ring at his belt big enough to sink a small boat. He said, I'll be right here, and somehow that was not comforting. Downstairs looked the same. Painted brick, tile floor with a slight slope to a drain somewhere you can't see. A low, constant hum from deeper in, and the faint water smell. No one else around. I didn't go into the restroom first. I walked past it. I wanted to see where the corridor went. It turned once and then again, and at the second turn I saw a narrow door on the left with a metal grate at the bottom. The grate had rusted where water had run. There were chalk marks on the floor, half circles, lines, and arrows drawn years ago by someone to show direction for an event. But on top of those faded marks were newer ones I would have missed if I wasn't looking down. Smudges like someone had traced the curve of the old chalk but added little spur shapes along the arc, tiny branches that stuck out in specific places, like counting points. I touched the chalk with my fingertip. It wasn't chalk, it smeared like ash. I followed the corridor to a machine room door with a sign, "Authorized personnel only." I turned the handle and opened it. The room inside was concrete, low ceiling, with old mechanicals along one wall and newer HVAC bolted on top of a platform. On the far wall, there was a rectangle patch that didn't match. The paint was the same, but the texture different, as if a door had been filled and painted over. In the painted patch, someone had pressed 4 shallow gouges into the surface in a row, and then one diagonal slash through them. A tally mark, like the one on my window at home. I didn't want to turn around because I knew if I did, something would be there. But I turned in a full, slow circle. The room was empty. Far away, a pump came on and clicked off again. That was it. I let out a breath. I walked backward to the door, made a joke in my head about authorized personnel, and stepped back into the corridor. Someone stood at the far end where it turned. I saw them for 1 second before the light over their head dimmed enough to wash their face into shadow. Tall. Height not easy to pin because of the ceiling. Shoulders too narrow for the height. A hang to the arms. The legs didn't shift weight like a person does when standing. They settled. The head didn't tilt so much as slide to one side, as if the neck were full of air. I said, "Can I help you?" Because that's what you say when you want something to be normal. The mouth moved. There was no voice. The movement wasn't right. The jaw opened too far, then closed, then opened again less far, like the order of operations was off. The light buzzed. I said my own name without meaning to, like my throat had a cough and the sound came out stuck to it. The figure took 1 step. The barefoot sound hit me. That was enough. I backed away. The restroom door was there to my right, closer than the stairs. I went for it because I needed a door to close. Not smart maybe, but it felt like the thing moved better in open hallway. I pushed into the restroom, closed the door, and pressed my back against it. I listened. No footsteps, only a slow, steady tap somewhere inside the room with me. I looked down. The drain at the center of the floor had a bubble rising and breaking, then another. The room smelled like old towels that didn't dry right. The light over the mirror wavered, and then steadied, and then wavered again, as if trying to blink. In the mirror, I saw the stall closest to the wall was closed again, even though I remembered both were open. I told myself to open the door and leave. I told myself to stop acting like a child. I took 2 steps toward the sink to get my hands under me. The tap on the pipe under the sink ticked twice. That made sense. Metal expands, contracts. But then a shape rose behind me in the mirror. It leaned in. There was a sound close to my ear, like the letters of my name learning to pronounce themselves. The second time it said my name, it got it right. The mouth was near my cheek, but there was no breath. Not warm, not cold. The outline of the head brushed the side of my face without pressure, like I was being examined for fit. I made a choice I regret. I tried to speak to it. "What do you want?" It answered in that layered voice. My name again, then a word I don't know, then the sound a person makes when they are trying to talk through water. The light went out. The darkness had weight. It felt crowded, like the room had been filled. The door at my back felt warm. The stall door made a small click, not like opening, but like locking. Something touched the back of my head, not a hand, more like the edge of a chin lowering to smell hair. In that instant, I felt like my height had changed. I felt like I was taller, as if I were standing inside a bigger body and moving the wrong way. The light came on again, and I was alone. My face was wet. My shoulders were wet. The mirror showed water on the floor that stopped in a curve around my feet. At the counter, someone had dragged a finger through the maid and written a set of 4 short lines and 1 diagonal. In the hallway, the figure was gone. I walked back to the stairwell and found the guard waiting there the way he said he would. He saw my face and didn't ask questions. He put a hand up to say, "Hold on," stepped away, returned with a clipboard, and handed me a pen. "Write your name and time in and out," he said. He didn't smile. He meant it. I wrote just my first initial and last name, and wrote the time I believed it was, not the time it had to be. He didn't correct me. He put the sheet on the desk and didn't look at it. I asked him, "Is there a story?" It felt dumb to say story when my clothes were damp and the skin on my neck stung like a cold wind had scraped it. He glanced past me toward the stairwell. He said, "Folks get turned around down there, that's all." He slid a business card across the desk. It was for a maintenance supervisor. He tapped the number with one finger and said, "If you need a copy of a report, ask for him," and then he took the card back and put it under the keyboard instead of giving it to me. His hand shook again. I went home. I threw my clothes in a trash bag and showered long and turned the water too hot and stood until my skin hurt. When I closed my eyes under the water, I saw darkness as a shape. The knocks came that night again at 3:17, not 3 knocks this time, but 4, and then the drag sound along the wall toward the hallway. I called the number the next day anyway. The supervisor wasn't there. A woman answered and said she'd take a message, and I left one without details, just that I had a question about the basement and something that might be a safety issue. No one called back. That weekend, I woke to my dog scrambling on the tile in the hall at 3:16. He slammed into my door and whined in a way he never has. I opened the door, and he tried to hide behind me. I turned on all the lights again. The house felt smaller than it should. In the bathroom, the mirror had writing in the fog again. Not the tally this time. Letters in a language I don't know. The lines doubled back in places like someone drew and then drew again for emphasis. I told myself to stop feeding it. I mean the attention. People say that attention is food. I spent a full day out of the house. That night the knocks came earlier, this time at 2:48, then again at 3:17. The second round came with a whisper at the window, not words, just the sound a lip makes when it sticks and unsticks. I broke and called a friend who volunteers with a local group that sometimes looks into odd stuff. She came the following Tuesday with another guy who brought a case like a photographer's. He was polite. He didn't make jokes. He set up 3 small digital recorders. He put a cheap temperature gauge in the bathroom and let it sit. He asked me to step outside for a minute and then come back in and tell him if anything felt different. "Don't tell me what you feel," he said. "Just say if it feels different from the room next to it." It did. The air was heavier, not colder. He said that too when he looked at the temperature gauge. No drop. Just a density that made my ears pressurize like an elevator going down. He ran one of the recordings back in the kitchen with the volume up. Mostly room tone, a fridge click, Remy's nails once. Then, around the 33-second mark, something that wasn't sound anymore so much as a movement of the air in the microphone. Then, a quiet, low utterance that could have been my name. My friend put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll write up what we got." The other guy nodded, but he didn't look happy. He looked like someone who had carried something too far. When he stood too quick, he banged his knee on the table and ran to the sink and retched. He apologized. He said he'd felt fine and then felt not fine all at once. He wasn't dramatic about it. He was embarrassed. They emailed me a week later with a report. It was 2 paragraphs that said nothing useful. The audio had anomalies. They advised me to reclaim the space by saying my full name out loud and telling whatever it was not to return. I tried it. It made the knocking stop for 2 nights. Then it came back at 3:17 again, this time from inside the closet by the front door. That closet has no exterior wall. Later that day, I called the building again. When I asked for records of incidents, the person said, "We don't have that too quickly." I went in person and asked for the maintenance supervisor whose card the guard had not given me. A different guard at the desk said, "He's not in." I said I'd wait. He said, "There's no place to wait." Which was funny because there are benches everywhere. He asked if he could help me with a facilities issue. I said it was about the basement. He said, "There is no basement open to the public," which was the first true thing he said. When I asked if staff had ever had trouble down there, he looked not at me but at the camera bubble in the corner of the ceiling, and then he wrote a number on a post-it and slid it toward me. It wasn't for the supervisor. It was for the borough police non-emergency line. I called. I should not have. A patrol car came by my house that night. The officer stood in my living room and tried to be kind. He said maybe I had a prowler. He asked if I had enemies. He asked me to install a motion camera. He wrote a report on his tablet. When I said the word basement, his face changed. He didn't move, but his eyes changed. He asked me to repeat the part about the tally marks. He asked if I had any photographs. When I showed him the mirror picture that didn't show anything, he said he understood, which made me mad because there was nothing to understand. I tried to move on. I stopped driving past the building. I put the dog bed in my bedroom so Remy would sleep close and stop pacing, because he had started pacing nightly right before the knocks. I kept the bathroom door closed. I would take down the mirror. New things started. In the shower, when I close my eyes to wash my hair, there is a sense of someone tall standing too close outside the curtain. The tally marks reappear in different places, once on the fogged window of my truck, inside, once traced small in the dust, once in salt that had spilled on my kitchen, as if someone had licked a finger and dragged it through. 4 and 1. Voices that sound like mine when I am tired. They say my name like I am saying it to myself, but I am not. Twice I heard other words. The first time it was open. The second time it was stay. I told it to leave in my firm voice. I read something from a book about boundaries. I slept with a radio on low. The knocks stopped for 8 nights. On the 9th, the knocks didn't come, but I woke anyway at 3:17 to the exact sound of the stall latch from the basement bathroom clicking open, followed by footsteps in the exact rhythm I remember. It stopped in the doorway to my room. I smelled it. I don't know why the metal smell comes. I said my name in my own voice. It answered with my name in the layered voice that wasn't layered anymore. It had the timing right. I called the guard desk again and asked for the first guard, the one with the shaking hand. They said he had retired. I went to the building on a Saturday morning and sat in my truck down the block long enough to make myself mad at myself. Then I walked in. The front desk guard was new to me. I asked about public tours of the basement history. He said there were none. I said I had been on one years ago. He said I hadn't. We had a moment of looking at each other like each of us knew that the other knew. He wrote a name on a paper and said to email the program director. I emailed. No one wrote back. At a holiday party, I finally told the story to a guy who used to work for the borough in building services. He listened with his mouth pinched, and then he said, "They had a problem down there with flooding in the old days. The drain's not right. Things come up instead of going down." He said that he had a cousin who was a night janitor in the 70s, and that the cousin had once come home with his shoes soaked in water and wouldn't bring them in the house, just left them outside on the porch in the cold until they froze. He said it followed him to church one Sunday. It sat in the back where the light doesn't reach. I asked why no one says anything. He said the people do. Nobody listens because the building is important. He meant the money. He meant the history. He meant the big stone face and the river steelworker protest story. A week ago, I woke at 3:17 and there were no knocks. I lay there and thought maybe it was over. Then my phone lit up on the nightstand by itself. No call, no message, just the display on. The lock screen showed the flashlight icon blinking on and off, without me touching it. I picked it up, and the light stopped blinking and stayed on, shining into my eyes. The phone showed the camera had been recording a video. I watched the video in the morning when there was sun. The clip was 40 seconds long. The first 20 were dark with tiny sounds of a house at night. Then, a slow, dragging sound. Then my voice, asleep, speaking my name. Then a whisper. Then nothing. At second 34, for a handful of frames, the camera caught a shape near my bedpost. That night, 317 came and went with no knocks. The next night, too. Last night, around midnight, my doorbell rang once. No one was there. There were wet footprints on the mat. Shoe prints. Old shoes with the treads worn smooth. The kind you see in old photographs, maybe. I am being watched. Some nights I think I'm being hunted. If anyone has ever been to this theater in Homestead, Pennsylvania, and witnessed the same things I have, I would really like to hear your story. I also heard rumors about disturbing things that took place back there during the early steelworker days. I don't know what to do at this point. I just want it all to stop. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.